Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Do Politicians Practice What They Preach? In this video, we're going to be looking at the question, what is liberalism? Now, this series is brought to you by our new book, Are All Lives Equal? Why Cost-Benefit Analysis Values Rich Lives More and How Philosophy Can Fix It. Stick around at the end of the video to learn more. Now, while in modern American parlance, the term liberal has come to mean anyone on the left of the political spectrum, liberalism has a philosophical meaning and is generally associated with support for a government that preserves freedom and individual rights. Ironically, this means that some who relish, quote, owning the libs are actually advocating for classically liberal positions around freedom, and they're arguing against the so-called illiberal left, who are actually arguing against liberal positions as such. So in this video, we're going to disentangle what it really means to be a liberal in the philosophical sense, and in the next video, we'll look at the question of whether or not liberals in the American context are actually liberal anymore. So, liberalism is a collection or family of positions that may agree on some basic components but disagree on others. Depending if you are from the US, from the UK, from France, or from somewhere else, you might mean something different when you say liberal. This video will focus on the components of liberalism that have broad agreement, though it will touch on some areas where different types of liberalism differ. Let's take a look. So, liberalism traces its origins back to John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes asked the question of what makes a government legitimate. He challenged the idea that oppression of a government is necessarily preferable to a state of nature where all are free to do as they wish. Locke argued a limited government was preferable to complete anarchy, but that people have basic rights to freedom, and a government's actions are justified only insofar as they are undertaken to protect the rights of others. One explanation of the rise of liberalism from a historical context is that it came following years of religious wars, where different ideologies tried to impose their views on others. Catholicism versus Protestantism, Christianity versus Islam, etc. For kings to claim a divine right to rule, they needed to force their people to accept a common God, and that God would provide them that right to rule. Liberalism provided both a governing system that allowed for tolerance between different religious groups, because everyone had the right to practice their own religion, and a new justification for government, the consent of the governed, not the divine right to rule. This solved both of these problems in one, and so paved the way for the rise of liberalism. Liberalism, therefore, positions itself as opposed to both anarchism, which does not accept the legitimacy of any government, and communitarianism, that allows governments to enforce a particular dogmatic set of cultural beliefs or policies on a population. Check out our video on communitarian nationalism for more on communitarianism. Liberals believe in freedom and basic human rights and only think government is justified when it is used to preserve that freedom and those rights. Now, some describe liberals as committed to four primary components of individualism. First, that individuals are the only things that have moral status, that we should only care about things like communities, languages, cultures, companies, or countries because there are people in them. These other things may have derivative moral status because there are individuals that care about them, but for the liberal, they lack a moral status on their own. Only people have kind of non-derivative moral status. Second, that individuals have a right to their own personal freedom, and that the purpose of the state is to protect that freedom. The idea of your freedom to swing your fist around ends at the tip of my nose is a guiding principle here. People are free to do as they wish, so long as they don't interfere with the freedom of others. The state is around to ensure that people don't interfere with the rights of others. Third, that these rights to freedom are equal, that people have these rights regardless of religion or other demographic characteristic. Note that this equality, i.e. equal treatment, not equity or treatment commensurate with need. Check out my video on equity versus equality for more. It's important to note here, because this is somewhere where liberals and progressives arguably disagree, that equality is treating everyone the same, not treating people better or worse depending on what they've gotten in the past or what they need. Fourth is the idea that individuals have freedom of thought and reason, and that the actions of a government must be justified in reference to that reason, not a particular dogma, religion, or ideology. This means that justification needs to be based on common reason and logic that everyone can agree to and understand, not a particular community or religion's worldview or morality. It is notable that liberalism is independent of democracy. You might have a government that respects basic rights and freedoms, but is not democratically elected, perhaps a constitutional monarchy. Conversely, you might have a government that is elected, but does not respect the rights of minorities and rules by the tyranny of the majority. So, while these terms are often conflated, they are importantly different. Liberals protect the rights of the minorities, whereas democracies protect the rights of the majorities against a privileged minority. While liberals generally agree on these principles of social freedom, there is broad disagreement on economics. Some argue that liberalism justifies a quote-unquote laissez-faire style of economic governance, limited taxes and regulation, free markets, etc. On this view of liberalism, the government should not intervene in the freedom of individuals to make and spend money. Sometimes such a view is referred to as neoliberalism, particularly in a development context. Other liberals, however, argue that the governments should ensure people the freedom to eat, have housing, and otherwise flourish. According to these liberals, liberalism justifies the government subsidizing basic necessities. These are clearly competing ideas of economic policy, so saying that liberalism, at least writ large, means something objective in an economic sense is challenging, since different liberals have different views on economics, at least at a global scale. Now, there are a range of objections that have been raised to liberalism. Some, particularly communitarians, argue that universalist or pluralistic ideas of human rights are insufficient to bind a community together. In doing so, or a country together, in doing so, they object to the first principle of liberalism, that individuals are the only things that matter, arguing that communities, cultures, or nations have rights or moral status. Others argue against pluralism in the first place, claiming that it must rely on some subjectivism or nihilism about morality, since it does not settle moral disagreements between individuals, though liberals might respond that they're merely agnostic about these issues, as opposed to taking a strong stance of subjectivism or nihilism. Others object to the second principle of personal freedoms, or more often disagree on what counts as a personal freedom. We see this in the debate around fetal personhood, with both sides claiming to defend freedom and disagreeing about when someone becomes a separate individual and where freedom ends. It can also be seen in questions around vaccine or mask mandates, whether people have the right to infect others or control what goes into their body. It becomes harder to have that swing your fist around until it hits the other tip of someone else's nose when we're talking about sneezes and microparticles. There are also many objections that focus on the economic versions of liberalism, claiming that the laissez-faire version is simply a justification for capitalism, or that the version which requires the state support people to be free of hunger or disease is effectively socialism. However, since liberals disagree on these views, there's not really objections to the underlying principles of liberalism. These are just objections to certain kinds of liberalism, so we're not going to dig into them too much. Want to learn more about the interactions between ethical mandates and economics? Check out our new book on the philosophy of economics, Are All Lives Equal?, which explores why economists value life and how philosophy can do it better. Check out the book, available now on Amazon, as well as our website, where there are some blogs where you can learn a little bit more about the book and read the first chapter. What do you think? Is liberalism something that you support? What kinds of freedom should count under liberalism's mandate to provide people rights? Does liberalism require laissez-faire economics? Or does it require a strong social safety net? Or should it be completely neutral on the two? Leave your responses in the comments below. If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org, and stay skeptical, everybody.